Chapter 61. The palace was not a proper fortress. Its walls were tall, but thin, the crenellations perfunctory, and walk was barely wide enough to navigate, not suitable for defending archers. Walls were useless against dragons, and it was not the Verdi way to fight to the last. Boisvord's multiple rings of defensive walls served chiefly to buy time for the monarch holding the palace to negotiate favorable terms of surrender should the outermost ramparts be breached. The innermost ring, these walls of the palace itself, were designed not to repel intruders, but to provide a commanding view of the city, so that whoever held the palace could see and direct the battle. Standing at the midpoint of a straight stretch of wall equidistant between the soldiers manning the two nearest watchtowers, Cora thus provided her own defenses. Wards shielding her against eavesdropping, projectiles, and those types of spells she knew how to ward against hummed in the back of her mind as she held onto them. Not that there was much risk of any of the above, except eavesdropping, which itself didn't even matter as she was alone and silent, but more and more, lately, she had felt vulnerable, leery of unseen watchers, hunters, enemies unknown. So, when standing exposed atop the battlements, she maintained magical defenses, because to be without them was to feel naked. Cora had come to learn, lately, what kinds of things might be lurking, whispering from any shadow. As secure as it was possible to be behind her wards, she watched the developments in the city as night fell. The last redness of twilight had faded, but the sky was still a pale purple. According to tradition, the processions began when the shadows of the westernmost mountains stretched across the valley to cover Boisvord itself. They were just now getting underway. Lit by candles and lanterns, the vigilants had begun their march. By custom, they would keep it up until dawn, and Cora was torn between disbelief that all or even most of them would, and curiosity what the city would look like tomorrow if they actually did. It wasn't everyone, obviously, not even close, but this was far more civilians than she'd ever half imagined would turn out for this. The details of individuals she could not see from up here, but the standards bristling above the throng of mourners were clear. The banners of Boisvord and the House of Holtzman, of course, but also many banners of the House of Claremont. In most other circumstances, a crowd of people brandishing the standards of the previous ruling dynasty were asking for a military response, but this was different. She knew the Queen would not even consider it. There was no rebellious intent here, and Henrietta was neither paranoid nor belligerent. Religious standards were in evidence, too, far more than Cora would have expected. The upraised crooks of Anassima the shepherd, of course, but also poles showing the cogwheel of Macon, and even a few racks of antlers symbolizing the huntsman's faithful, all of these icons threaded through with thin black pennants of mourning. The flock were one thing. Those other two faiths had little to do with funerary duties, as a rule. There was no iconography of the jungler, of course, but there wouldn't be. Those go-off-balls who followed him would show respect by staying well away tonight. She continued to silently watch the procession as he approached, not looking up. She had of course felt him enter the region of her wards long before he climbed the staircase into physical view. Clarence still paced slowly along the ramparts toward her, moving at a carefully measured pace. Verdi of a certain rank were instinctively careful not to startle each other. Cora read nothing into that. At least, she tried not to. Lately, she was less and less sure. What did Clarence know? What did he plan to do? "Your ministry's doing, I assume," she finally said, once he had stepped up beside her and leaned forward against the battlements. Smiling faintly, Clarence shook his head. "Well, the groundwork has been carefully laid for years, of course. But this? No, this is quite spontaneous. It wasn't even the flock who organized it, I believe, but a coalition of several of the adventurer guilds. It's only happening now because it takes a while for a rabble of peasants to organize anything. Also to have that many Claremont standards sewn in a hurry. I doubt there were that many still in the city." Cora narrowed her eyes, squinting down at the procession in mounting confusion. But why? What would the common folk possibly care? At all, never mind. This much. Her Highness was quite popular among the citizenry, the spymaster said mildly. Cora jerked her head up to give him a stare of such disbelief that it bordered on accusation. "Oh, not entirely unprompted," he acknowledged, his thin smile widening by a hair. "Groundwork, as I said." "What groundwork?" "Clarence, I can't imagine anyone truly disliked the girl. She was at her absolute worst annoying, and that made her a damned sight more agreeable than most of the people with whom we have to deal on a daily basis. But let's not trouble to pretend she was actually good for anything, functionally. Those people's taxes paid for her to sleep all day and stargaze all night for years. Why would they feel anything but resentment?" "Groundwork," he repeated, giving her a gently indulgent look. "Oh, you're not wrong, Cora. That would be an eminently reasonable attitude for the public to have toward Princess Perseverance, which is why I had my people head that off from the earliest opportunity. It's all about working with what's there, so much more effective, not to mention easier, than trying to spin a narrative from whole cloth. You recall some of Her Highness's more embarrassing moments, meeting the nobles and diplomats she did before the Queen began keeping her out of the way?" "I try not to," Cora admitted. "There's no pleasure in seeing a hapless teenager humiliated. We were all that age once." "Well, those incidents were all witnessed by a host of servants and functionaries in addition to the dignitaries involved. From that, with a smidge of guidance from my hand, Her Highness has acquired a reputation throughout the kingdom as an eccentric truth-teller who stubbornly says what she actually thinks, right to the faces of the powerful. That's something that resonates with the lower classes, even if you and I know that wasn't why she did it. Heard third hand, shaped by agents of the crown, a princess's social ineptitude can be transmuted into vicarious indulgence. She is the girl who got to say right to all the stuffed shirts what all those millers and blacksmiths and bricklayers would never dare." Cora stared at him, mouth slightly open. "It would have been harder, had a different opinion prevailed among those who actually knew her," he continued, turning back to gaze out across the city and the procession of lights and banners now moving slowly through its streets. "A palace requires enormous numbers of personnel to function. It is impossible to truly control what rumors escape. Fortunately, Her Highness was quite popular among the servants. The natural gossip thus tended to complement my carefully crafted story, rather than contradicting it." "Popular? Percy? I didn't just pull the cover story out of nowhere, you know. Even to those who know she was being rude only out of innocent failure to figure out how to be polite. Well, just for example, nobody likes Marquis de Valère. The sight of them going red as a beet when Princess Perseverance asked him out loud what the point was of him holding a border fief when he spent half the year socializing in the capital as a cherished memory for many a clerk, footman, and maid. Among others. Cora blinked twice and belatedly remembered to close her mouth. "Besides," Clarence murmured, "those who did know her were well aware she meant no harm. That general social obtuseness might not be acceptable in an acting royal, but to know her was to know she was earnest and kind, beneath the blunt disrespect. Her chambermaids have been absolutely distraught. One had to be sedated for 2 days." The Maj mulled this in silence, staring out at the procession. "Servants are more perceptive than we well-bred few like to think," he continued after a few seconds. "I suspect that is true everywhere, but particularly among we Verdi. You know, Cora, the palace servants don't hate you, either. They like you less than the princess, but everyone can tell you're just not very interested in other people, not cruel or unreasonable. 2 years ago when you defended that girl who dumped wine on you to the head maid, you gained a generous measure of sympathy that's forfeited a lot of the resentment you might have otherwise accrued by being so brusque to everyone." That? Who even remembers that? It was obviously a freak accident, anyone could see it wasn't the girl's fault. Your Maj's regard for what is true supersedes your noble's regard for what is proper, and commoners appreciate that. Even when they can see you generally not paying them any attention. They deal with enough outright cruelty to value the difference. And if I may be so bold as to offer a word of advice, Cora, It would do no harm to cultivate some amity among the people who have the most opportunity to poison your food. Cora worked her jaw slowly, metaphorically chewing on that. "I'll get her back, Clarence," she finally said in a quieter voice. "That, or we're all doomed anyway and none of the rest of this will matter." He nodded. "I am sorry to lay so much of this on your shoulders. I know your own priorities are generally more academic. Soldiers and spies are accustomed to risking their lives. The courtmage. I did not apply for this position without understanding in full what it entails, Clarence. Tangling with the damned dragons when the need arises is the price I pay for getting to pursue my personal research at the Crown's expense, and I'll have no one call me a thief. What worries me is that my skills may not be the most applicable to some parts of this. I know you'd rather send a proper agent to handle everything, but if I must be the spearhead, well, coach me as best you can and I'll do my utmost not to bungle it." "So shall we all," he agreed. "For Crown and country. And for that poor girl. As it happens, I came looking for you on business, not that this hasn't been a pleasant chat. My people in the city have arranged the first steps. If all goes well, you'll be needed to make the opening play at dawn, just as the procession is breaking up." She straightened and drew in a breath, flexing her fingers. Flexing her will, examining the wards surrounding her for any point of failure, any interference. "All right, I'm all yours. What's the plan?" Full dark found Colin at the party, surrounded by laughter and music and dancing, chewing methodically on the single juiciest steak he had ever experienced, and sipping at a strong drink made of fermented goat's milk and some kind of cactus nectar, chilled by conjured ice. This was the life. If he had to spend his evening somewhere other than the embrace of one of his lovely spouses, this was a decent substitute. The satisfaction of a day's work well done topped it all off nicely. Their discussions with the Harry had gone quite well. Tomorrow, the real quest was to begin. Truthfully, he was only sitting here at this table rather than still circulating because steak wasn't a very portable food, and this was just too good to abandon. He could live with letting the others come to him for a little while. Everyone else who wasn't working on a similar cut of meat was in motion, circulating if not joining the dancers around the bonfire. Norrin and Elizabeth had only just stepped away, giving him a few moments of silence in which to appreciatively chew before his next conversational partner approached. Daryl, she sauntered over, holding a pipe of something fragrant and slightly acrid that the Harry smoked in one claw, and some kind of drumstick in the other. "What, you're eating poultry?" he chided playfully as she flopped onto the bench beside him. "After the way Gigi was raving about these steaks? You've got to try these, Daryl. This is amazing. PSSH, I eat aurochs all the damn time. Now, proper traditional Harry festival food, I haven't had this shit in gods, it's been at least 60 years. I have missed these little guys. Thanks for having weird deity problems, Pants. Getting to come here has been exactly what I needed. If you hear, by the way, who's supervising Vanamax? You're the head of household, mister. Anyway, Max has his own harem now. There's like 8 huntresses over there fawning on him. He is absolutely reveling in the attention. I give it even odds whether he manages to figure out they're actually trying to flirt. Harry don't just come out and say it, and Max, well, can't blame a boy for being clueless, considering. As long as he's not burning the place down, I guess. She chuckled and tore off a big bite of her drumstick. He followed suit with his steak. Colin washed it down with a swig of the creamy, sour alcohol, for which he found himself developing a taste. Also, in addition to stamina and physical resilience, it seemed godlings gained strong resistance to mind-altering substances. This stuff was strong enough that he was keeping the fumes carefully away from the fire, but rather than being knocked on his ass as seemed natural, he was barely feeling it. Daryl, she took a long draw from her pipe and blew smoke into the air, different smoke than usual. Colin leaned away pointedly. Smoking was not a vice of his. One of his drinking buddies had tried to introduce him to it back home, and he'd come straight to the conclusion that the lungs were the worst possible vector to imbibe anything. The imbalance isn't quite this big, most places, Daryl, she said. Greencroft is a special place. Everyone here is either in the care of the croft, or serving a season helping run it. In their actual communities you'll see a lot more men. The birth rate difference is, like, about 6 or 7 to 1, I think? Something around there. I noticed the arm cords, he said. It's been interesting, watching their family dynamics without understanding the details. And don't think I didn't see you carefully refraining from asking prying questions, she said, grinning and pointing the pipe stem at him. Good boy, Pants. You are officially a respectful guest. A worthy title to add to my list of accolades, he said solemnly. She blew another puff of smoke, gazing at the bonfire rather than at him. I've always thought the arm cords were ingenious. A funny little holdover from back when they escaped Rivak. All the symbolism of a leash without subjecting anybody to the indignity of a collar. A man who touches his wife's cord without her permission is asking to have his balls kicked right through the top of his head, which makes it a really meaningful intimacy when she offers it to him to hold. Now, wait a second, Colin objected. Nobody in Rivak was ever kept on leashes. I know the circumstances around the Harry leaving didn't exactly look good, but slavery has never been a thing in the Empire. Izaroa wiped it out before. It was the lost century, Pants, she said, tail twitching in annoyance. Everything was falling apart. Rivak was doing well not to outright collapse like almost every other country on the continent. They did not have control over everything happening. Even if Izaroa didn't order what happened to the Harry, take note that she felt bad enough about it not to ever try bringing them back into the imperial fold. It's not every day you fail a group of your citizens so badly they have to elevate a brand new goddess about it. He grumbled wordlessly and swagged his drink. It's cute that you're so defensive of her, Daryl, she teased. Probably don't bring it up with her, though, I bet this is still a sore point. But yeah, the cords are a symbol at the core of their whole dynamic. In theory, or at least in principle, the man is the absolute head of the household. His wives are to obey him completely. So, they are patriarchal. Oh, not even a little bit, she chuckled. That is literally what you just... See, the Harry raise their children communally, and divorce has no stigma and in fact no ceremonial component, not for a woman, anyway. There is nothing stopping a huntress from dumping her husband's fluffy ass and taking his kids the second she is not satisfied with him. Head of household means his full-time job is making everybody happy. Hairy masculinity is all about being a pleaser, being diplomatic and kinda nurturing, not to mention flirty and sexy. Actually, it's basically you, Colin. If you didn't have enough wives already, I'd suggest you try to go native here, you'd fit right in. So, it sounds like the men have basically no power, then. They have a lot of influence. That expectation that his word is absolute law within the family, I wasn't kidding about that. And while being single carries no stigma for a woman, being a wife conveys a lot of status. The incentives are positive, not negative. A man gets to be the big boss as long as he's a good boss. He can have as many women as he wants, which means, functionally, as many women as he can devotedly adore and lift up and generally keep happy, and their expectations are high. Men are also the priests, by default. So, yeah. It's a tricky balance, but it works for them. They've been doing this for a long time. Basically ever since he met Rose and protected them from the raiders who used to roam these plains. Colin thought about pointing out that it was Izaroa who had had those raiders wiped out and made protections for the Harry and their sovereignty part of imperial law, but Daryl, she probably already knew that. She was probably half hoping he'd give her an excuse to make fun of him for it. That, and there were more salient points under consideration here. He had a sudden insight telling him where this was going. There are all kinds of people in the world, Colin, she said quietly, staring into the fire and for the moment just passively holding her pipe and drumstick. All kinds of ways to live, and love. I think it'd be a real shame to wall yourself off into one little viewpoint without giving anything else a chance. Who knows what you might miss out on, that way? Yep. Much more clever than she acted, this one. I'm here to tell you, Roshi, I know that better than most people, Colin replied, also gazing at the flames, and the silhouettes of dancing Harry bounding back and forth in front of them. I am living a very different life than anything I expected growing up. Literally every good thing in my world these days came because I was willing to embrace something that would have seemed inconceivably wild to me just a few years ago. What I've figured out is, you have to be open, but not so flexible you blow about with every breeze. In the end, everything comes down to each person, their identity, the core of who they are. Who I am. What I believe, what I feel. What I don't feel. As long as I stay true to that, I can live with whatever comes. He chanced a sidelong glance at her. Vaidaralshi's lips curled in a rueful little smile before she stifled it by taking a big chomp of meat. Colin sawed off and bit into another bite of his own. You're a smooth one, Arkansas Colin's a liqueur. Even when. Well. I appreciate that about you. They ate in silence for a while, and to his great relief, it didn't feel awkward. Chapter 62. The cafeteria was much busier than usual when Teffin tied on her apron to begin her customary morning shift. Well, it was more populated, but actually not any more energetic. There were the usual morning regulars, most of whom had been served before she got in and were methodically working through their breakfasts as always. Today, the additional guild members present had stopped in for a little pick-me-up after marching all night in the vigil. The mood was both tired and somber. Peeking out through the kitchen window, she took quick stock. Good, Kif had been on the last overnight shift, and he was on the ball as usual. Everybody had food or in some cases just hot tea in front of them, except the newest arrivals only just now slumping into seats around the table. Teffin grinned in recognition before mastering her expression to suit the mood. She liked this group, they were, if nothing else, unfailingly entertaining. Usually they liked to lurk in one of the corner tables, but none were currently available, so they were right out in the open, in full view of the whole room. That might provide some free comedy. She efficiently put together a tray and pushed through the swinging doors onto the cafeteria floor. Sidling deftly between the tables, Teffin arranged her face into a suitably solemn expression as she arrived at her destination and set down the pot of steaming tea. Good morning, kids. Let's get something hot into you. It must have been a long night. Oh, Ryoko started to interject, but we didn't order. Now, no wise, Teffin assured them with a wink. Oh, do whatever and whenever you like. Trust me, I know 3 adventuers who need a cup of strong spiced tea when I see them. This single quote WW get you safely to bed, I'll keep you up quite long enough to get some Actub Weakfast. Whichever you choose. Thanks, Teffin, Gregarious Greg the one-man bard said, lifting his teacup to her in a little toast as soon as she filled it. Whether he meant it or not, the motion caused a melodious little two-tone chime from the apparatus affixed to his arm. You're a real one. Your consideration is appreciated, Lilith added, her voice more hoarse than usual. This was why she liked the Lone Wolves of Destiny. Sure, they were ridiculous, which was funny, but they were also nice. They bothered to learn the names of the guild's clerks and serving staff, and said please and thank you when they wanted something. There were some far more impressive adventurers in this guild who could stand to learn from these little gobbers, in Teffin's opinion. Thanks, Teffin, Ryoko repeated dutifully, giving her a tired smile. What do we think, wolves? Stay for breakfast, or go crash? Destiny favors the prepared, Lilith grated, then tried unsuccessfully to stifle a huge yawn. Excuse me. We do have to eat, but I am not sure I'll make it through a meal without drifting off. Not that it was all that strenuous, physically, but what wears on the spirit, wears on the body, Greg added. He didn't look too worn out, himself, but he was holding still enough not to provide an accidental soundtrack for once. A night spent thinking about what happened to that poor girl. I think my brain needs rejuvenation more urgently than my stomach. But perhaps a quick bite first, Lilith suggested, looking borderline guilty. Something small? It would save time later. If I eat lunch out of schedule it'll throw me out of whack for days, she added in a quieter voice. Bad enough our sleep rhythm is shot. I'm sorry, Tefan, we don't mean to make you stand around waiting on us, Ryoko said. Please, don't let us keep you. I WW keep it in mind, if somebody use needs something, she said, winking. But you guys all it for the moment. Take you time. Ryoko nodded, then their expression fell. Sorry. I know what you mean, Greg. I'm having a little trouble focusing on the prosaic details. It's not like we even knew her, but I can't shake the thought of what it must have been like for Princess Perseverance. The gods sent that she's still alive. Perhaps someone can. Rio. Greg's voice was gentle, but suddenly firm. Listen. You know I love you and that conviction to do what's right, to help whoever needs it, is a big part of why. There's a reason we voted you in charge. But you're not Valor folk. Don't rile the dragons, Lilith whispered. She clutched her staff to her thin chest as if for comfort, looking hunted. No matter the cause. No matter the stakes. Never rile the dragons. If we had only our own lives to throw away, I would call for us to set out for Dragonvale this minute. But if the dread is provoked, you cannot know who will suffer. Only that they will number in the hundreds if not thousands. I understand, Ryoko sighed. Really, guys, I do. Maybe not down in my soul the way you do, growing up here, but it's not like I'm stupid. I'm the last who wants to cause more destruction. I'm relieved to hear that. The three of them looked up at the new voice. Tefan had already turned toward the latest arrival, just because she had just arrived, and that was her job. Also, she experienced a muted thrill, having to concentrate on keeping her bright, bland, customer service smile in place. What was she doing here? Unlike some adventurer guilds, the Verdi Herons made a point to keep in touch with the civilian populace, which meant among other things that their cafeteria was open to the public, guild members ate at a discount, but anyone could come in and order, what with a convenient entrance right there on the street. Tefan got to meet some fascinating people thanks to this policy, but here was one she had never expected to see and hear. All members of the tribe needed to know all the significant players in Boisvert, especially the surprising ones. They also needed to either conceal how much they knew or carefully downplay how they happened to have learned it, which meant she now had a decision to make. Not rolling the dragons is always an important rule, said Courtmage Coradacron herself, stepping up to the table, but it's especially important for everyone to keep their heads down and ears up right now. Something is weird with those beasts lately. Taking the princess was a move with no precedent in 600 years, and it's been at least 3 weeks now since anyone has seen the dread at all. A confusing portent, said Lilith. I struggle to grasp its meaning. So do we all, agreed the older woman, save that now is no time to go and do anything rash. That's the thing about dragons, whatever they're up to, we'll all find out sooner or later. I say, you do seem rather more in the know than most, said Greg. I confess the thought of those creatures up to something and having no hints fairly makes my skin crawl. Care to join us for a cuppa and perhaps a bit of gossip? Well, it's not as if I don't have time, Cora said with a thin smile, pulling out a chair. Miss, could I trouble you for another cup? No, you can't, Tefan said solemnly, then grinned and winked. It's never any tubway. Just sit tight, gorgeous, I WW be back in 2 shakes. With a final flirtatious flick of her tail, she turned and glided back to the swinging doors, and then into the kitchen. Guys. Tefan stage whispered as soon as she was through, putting on a breathlessly excited demeanor. We have a swabwadi in the cafeteria. You WW never guess who. The head cook gave her a faintly annoyed look across his big vat of porridge, but the dishwasher and the outgoing server she'd just replaced both looked up. "Okay, you weepo Bob White," Kif said, grinning as he continued shrugging into his coat. "We WW never guess. So who is it?" "It's Kawadekwan." "I can't even translate that," scoffed the girl up to her arms in soapy water. "The Koutmij," Tefan exclaimed, just barely quietly enough not to be audible outside. "Fwoom the perwace." The facade of starstruck excitement served to make her lashing tail and twitching ears not look incongruous. The precise patterns in those movements conveyed a surreptitious message to only one other person present. Tribe business plus target plus observe and report. "All right, well," the cook grunted, "is she ready to order?" "Ooh, sounds fancy," said Kif with a grin. "Maybe I WW go hobnob a bit. Can't hoot to make pawoof-weens." "Oi," the cook barked, pointing a dripping spoon at him. "Don't bother the customers, boy." "Excuse me," Kif said with mock solemnity, while signaling a silent acknowledgement to Tefan's message with a flick of his own ears. "My shift just ended. I'm accustomed you to, now. Pay waps I WW go give some business to you gwubby witty establishment. I how the food isn't too away." He sashayed out through the swinging doors while Tefan made for the cup rack. "Ugh," grumbled the girl scrubbing plates. "I don't know why you hire those little cats. They are insufferable even when they're actually being useful." "I hire them," the cook grunted, "because they are small, weak, and annoying, and people in that position know what's best for them. Unlike, for example, a mid school dropout whose adventuring career consists of endless chore duties because they are short on their guild dues every month. Every Nhia I've ever employed has worked twice as hard as you and given me half the sass about it. You just worry about your washing, your shift doesn't end until that batch is done." Dawn found a small gathering outside the gates of Reencroft, consisting of the guests and only a few locals, Ma'anet, Naren, Leary, and a handful of huntresses Colin hadn't gotten to know well, with none of the elderly or infirm residents. No surprise there. A lot of the Croft's population was some combination of sleep-deprived and hungover this morning. It had been a better-than-decent party. A few of the huntresses looked on the bleary side, but the rest of them had either deliberately taken it easy last night, or were godlings or dragons. Now, while the group stood in a wide, uneven arc facing out into the desert, Ma'anet stepped forward alone, raising his arms toward the sun which was just now peeking above the horizon. Colin leaned surreptitiously toward Isabet. What is?" She shot him a reassuring little smile sidelong, whispering back. "The Harry love their rituals. They have a lot of them. But they're very down-to-earth and logical, and adaptable. I've learned it's not usually hard to follow along." "This is our path to what you asked for," Naren added just as softly. "Don't worry much about the details. We value a respectful spirit more than excessive propriety." Reassured, Colin nodded and fell respectfully silent. He remained as fascinated as when he first arrived. The Harry were good hosts, good sports, and had so many intriguing little customs, he felt he could spend weeks here just getting to know them and not consider it misused time. Whatever signal Ma'anet was waiting for, he didn't keep them in suspense for long. Turning back around to face the group, the priest smiled and held out his hands in a gesture of benediction. "Friends, tribmates, people of the Sound, and honored guests. This day we are blessed by the presence of those new to us, and to our ways. And so we gather at dawn, at the time of new beginnings, that they may set out upon their pilgrimage. Isabet Halloway. Arkansas Collinseliker. You have shown yourselves to be good friends and true. I am grateful that the opportunity to see you off is mine. From here you shall walk a path that leads you to stand before Hiamat herself, the path every Harry, either born or made, has walked before you." Colin found himself frowning in sudden concern. Despite his innate disinclination to interrupt a ritual, he felt the need to ask. "Ah, so. This is an initiation?" Don't worry, Ma'anet said with a cheerful smile, dropping the ritual cadence to speak more plainly. You aren't joining the tribe by doing this. It's not even a tribe sending you. Reencroft is neutral ground. No, this is just a preliminary step along that path. Isabet has decided to follow that path in truth, and your arrival provides an opportunity to spare her the wait for an actual tribal pilgrimage. Colin glanced at the ice midge, restraining his surprise. He hadn't realized she was actually planning to formally and officially go native. Isabet's expression was resolute and solemn, that of a person taking the matter at hand with the utmost seriousness. As for you, Colin, Ma'anet continued, we don't have a specific ritual for an outsider just seeking an audience with Tiamat on his own business, simply because, well, nobody does that. In all of our history I'm sure you're not the first, but I don't know the tales of any others, so we are improvising a bit. Now, sending someone right into the arms of our goddess isn't a thing to be done lightly, or without due reverence. However, you have clearly approached us, and her, with the appropriate respect. Your explanations and your actions have satisfied me that you mean well. It's my pleasure to include you in this ceremony. It seems to me the best compromise to achieve all our needs. I thank you for your consideration, Colin said, bowing. Ma'anet bowed back to him, and when he spoke again, his voice once more fell into a ceremonial rhythm. None are sent alone to present themselves before Tiamat. In truth, rarely are they sent in so small a group, for the desert is dangerous and it is our way to rely upon one another. No priest of the Hiri would allow the young or the new to embark upon this pilgrimage if it would bring them into unreasonable danger. But you are both quite formidable beings in your own right, and there's also the company you yourself have brought. Vedaralshi, still in her humanoid form, grinned and waved. Behind her Venomox just watched in silence, towering over the group in the larger reptilian form in which he felt the most comfortable. Colin had carefully refrained from acknowledging the enormous woven garland of vines and desert flowers draped around his neck, or the smaller ones twined through his horns. I judge you a fair match for the rigors of the desert, Ma'anet intoned, and so there is only the question of your sponsors. You will be guided along this path by fully initiated Hiri, and be taught that which you must learn of our ways along the route from here to Tiamat's shrine. And so, he once more held out both hands in a wide gesture, turning a grave expression slowly across the entire assemblage. I asked who among our people will sponsor Isabet upon her journey? I will, Naren answered immediately, stepping forward. I have found her a good friend, to myself, to our family, and to our people. It's been my privilege to be present as she found refuge among us, and if none claim it above me, I would ask the honor of guiding her on this stage of her journey. Colin glanced fleetingly around, noting a rather subdued response to this from the assembled Hiri. Was Naren not popular or something? Whatever the case, Ma'anet smiled in approval, as did Hiri. And, most importantly, Isabet, smiling as if reassured. And so be it, then, Ma'anet proclaimed. Now, I asked who among our people will sponsor Arkansas Colin upon his journey? I will. Several of the nearby huntresses had started to shift as the priest spoke, but before any could put themselves forward, Gigi the irascible cook had called out at the top of her lungs and bounded forward. Everyone looked taken aback at this, including Ma'anet. Ah. Gigi? Are you? You lot can go without my cooking for a few days, she said, folding her arms imperiously. It's not like you were starving before. I like Colin. Hells, I like anybody who befriends dragons. So he's a somewhat unconventional participant in this ritual, so what? That just calls for a somewhat unconventional guide. Naren's a fully trained priest and everything, so if I'm a bad influence he'll provide a suitably stodgy counterpoint. Well, I guess that's a compelling enough argument, Ma'anet allowed. I have to say this was the last thing I expected, but Gigi is a member in good standing of our people and her tribe, at least as far as I know. Despite being a bit eccentric. To be clear, Colin, if others wish to put themselves forward, This choice is yours to make. For his part, Colin found this too good an opportunity to pass up. Not that he had any firm plans in this direction, he hardly knew anything about GEG, after all, but an idea had been tickling at the back of his mind since he tasted her steaks. Even if nothing came of it, this would be the perfect chance to find out if there was something worth pursuing here. "I'm honored, GEG," he said aloud, inclining his head deeply to her. "I look forward to learning from you." "Too right, you do," she said smugly. "All right, then," Maanit said. "Our new friends have been quickly sponsored, as positive an omen as we could hope, for the beginning of a pilgrimage. Supplies have been prepared for you. Your chosen guides can show you the route to take. May the desert give you safe paths and shade. Carry with you the prayers and goodwill of the Hiri who welcome you among us, and may the goddess return you to us wiser than you left." Colin found himself really grateful to whoever those girls were who'd spent the evening mellowing Vanamux out. The dragon didn't even ruin the moment with a derisive snort. Maybe that meant there was a hope of growth for them all. "And then she left," Kif reported. "It was just a casual chat, like any stranger meeting new friends over wavecast and hitting it off. I wouldn't think it was anything at all, if it had been anyone use. But that one never weaves the paways except on business." "Nevu was exaggerating," said Kefni, "but you not wrong, she's not a sociable type. This is a Mayo Depachu. Good job, Kif. It was Teflon who spotted you and tipped me off. I only know Kawa by reputation, I doubt I'd have recognized you." "Don't why, there's enough did for everybody," she said, grinning. Here in the tribe's secure chambers deep below their headquarters in the roundabout they had no fear of eavesdroppers, but in keeping with Nhia custom and grandmother's firm reminders, they still spoke openly in Felvelen, not using silent signals. So, a casual chance meeting for anyone use, but for the Wekwas of Koutmij. "Fist contact," Kif said, nodding. "It was written all over the whole thing. She wasn't even all that good at it. No sweetie. I don't think that woman actually talks to Pirapa that often. She seemed like someone who'd been coached in a Hawaii on how to make contact with new assets." "That means quad," Kefni murmured, frowning. "Oh, this is juicy. Why send you and not one of his own agents? Also, there's no chance we the Envy wants to noticed. The other Prius V would jump on this." Kif nodded again. "How's the investigation going?" "Most what of watching the usual suspects chase each other's ties in a slightly more organized fashion than usual. Actually, Kif, this might be your first week though." Grinning, she reached out to ruffle his hair. "Nice job." He smirked even as she ducked away. "That means she just put a target on those kids' heads, too. Makes me wonder if that was the point, how just a side effect she was willing to accept. We WW have to we on more before we know more. What can you tell me about these adventures? What were they called?" Kif put on his most solemn expression. "The one with of destiny." Kefni stared at him in silence while his lips twitched. "Serious why? Serious why? Did they was a bet?" "You'd betcha sit down, Kefni, this is where it starts to get wide." Chapter 63 Ugh. "This is going to take forever," Vanamux groaned. "You know, Max," his sister rejoined cheerily, skipping along on her current 2 legs, "you could very easily match your pace to the group if you just shifted." He snorted, this time hard enough to ruffle the huge garland of vines and flowers still draped around his neck. Colin had a certain amount of sympathy for him, but only a certain amount. He was indeed taking one halting step per everyone else's dozen, but also, she was right. Vanamux silently invoked magic and Colin instinctively focused on what he was doing, not that he didn't trust him, exactly, but Vanamux was still more than a little unpredictable. This proved harmless, though. He simply cast a spell of preservation across the flowers and vines draped about his neck and wound through his horns. They immediately ceased ruffling in the intermittent breeze that puffed across the desert, shifting only with his own movements. She put on such a huge, mischievous grin it was as good as announcing beforehand what she was about to say. "Oh, look at that. He likes his flowers. That's so sweet." "Don't listen to that smug harpy, Venemax," Gigi ordered, causing she to stumble a step. "You look great. That is a solid look right there. Sure, flower-heavy accessories can look wishy-washy or effeminate, like if Pretty Boy here wore the same thing." She jerked a thumb at Naran, who just rolled his eyes and shook his head, while Elizabeth frowned over his ears at Gigi, who blithely continued her spiel. "It's different on a dragon. 20 tons of fangs and fire goes with anything. That's a look that says, yeah, these are my flowers, the hell's you gonna do about it? Like I said, solid." "Excuse me, but did everyone else hear that little hairball call me a smug harpy?" she demanded. "Don't be one if you don't want it pointed out," Colin said. She bared her teeth at him, sending a spray of sand across the path with a lash of her tail. Venemax had raised his head at Gigi's encouragement, and now stuck his nose in the air, a massive sculpture of self-satisfaction. "I was thinking about what you said previously, Colin, about treasure, and what makes it truly valuable. If you think about a garland of flowers not just as flowers, but what it means to the specific people who made it. To desert dwellers who don't see much greenery, to particularly tiny people for whom the creation of anything large enough to decorate a dragon represents a great deal of effort. Why, in context, this is a kingly gift indeed. I doubt even my father was ever shown such esteem. I am quite touched. I find that I feel most gratified. Perhaps I shall visit these here again sometime. They are quite agreeable little mortals." She grinned up at him, which he of course ignored. Even Naran was surreptitiously regarding the dragon with an amused expression. Fortunately Venemax didn't seem to notice. Elizabeth, however, was steadily watching both dragons, as consistently as she could without staring directly at them. Colin had already noticed that she kept unconsciously shifting position in the group as they walked, keeping someone between her and both dragons whenever possible. Also, that the air around her had grown slightly but noticeably colder. He casually adjusted his own pace, falling into step on the other side of her from Naran. "It's amazing how quickly you get used to them," he commented lightly. "Even with what a wild idea that is, getting used to dragons. But in many ways they're like everyone else. Individuals, and surprisingly personable. Well, these ones, anyway." "These," she whispered. Elizabeth ducked her head and Naran glanced up at her in concern. The mage kept her voice low, glancing repeatedly at the only dragon who might currently be close enough to overhear. "It's just that, Colin. These have terrorized my homeland and my people for so long that our very culture has been shaped around the fear of them." "Not these two," he said, just as quietly and far more calmly. Deliberately calmly, making himself a counterpoint to her nerves and bringing down the level of energy in the conversation. "She and Venemax are barely more than 100 years old. And they haven't done anything but hunt game for their family. There was really only one dragon who actively terrorized the Avervals." Actively is an important word. It's carrying a lot of weight in that description. He nodded. It was a fair point, and one he'd had to make peace with, himself. Looking up, he caught she peeking over at them, but she immediately averted her eyes. At least one of the dragons was listening. "We don't have hereditary nobility in Rivak," he said, "not in the sense that Vale nations do. So I may be extrapolating a bit, but I think talking to dragons is a lot like talking to aristocrats would be. Their pride is important in a way that goes beyond not hurting the feelings of someone who can breathe fire at you. It is weight, a significance that verges on the sacred. Pride is absolutely core to who a dragon is." Her expression was skeptical, but she was listening. Taking that for the only encouragement he was likely to get, Colin continued. "So there are things one can't just come out and say in a dragon's hearing. Like, For example, that Atraximos was more powerful than the rest of them combined, and they were as afraid of him as everyone else. That they might feel as relieved as we are that he's gone. Venomix emitted a sharp sigh that verged on a snort. And I thought we were being discreet about that. So they were both listening. It occurred to Colin that he didn't really have a solid idea of the acuity of their hearing, or other senses. "Oh, did you? Vaderil," she asked sweetly. "Is that what you thought? That's good, Max. It's very reassuring to know that nobody's going to charge off and do something big, splashy, and incredibly stupid to rile up the local mortals as much as possible." He bared his teeth and pointedly turned his head away, scowling out across the passing desert. "Discreet doesn't mean secretive," Colin hastened to interject before either of them could escalate, or Geg could say whatever her suddenly intrigued expression portended. "It means applying judgment and taking each situation as it comes. At this point, Atraximos hasn't been seen in weeks. Everyone in the Vales will have already noticed that something is up, to say nothing of recent events in Boisford. Given what we came here to ask of the Harry, it was important to deal with them in good faith. And it's not as if they or Isabet are in a position to rush off and tell the Valley folk, at least not before they figure it out on their own." "Nor would we," Naran added, his tone mild as ever. He didn't have his brother's effusive good cheer, but they shared that fundamentally calming demeanor. The Harry understand very well the distinction between discretion and secrecy. "We are not interested in other people's business, nor in disseminating ours." "I still can't. It's almost impossible to credit." Isabet shook her head slowly. "The dread, gone? It's like hearing death itself took a holiday. I can't." "And you? Colin, the scribe I met crossing the Great Plateau. You slew Atraximos? I don't think I would believe it if you didn't have two of his own get here corroborating the story. And apparently following your orders." "We follow his lead, not his orders, Vaderil," she said solemnly. "Big difference." "Not always even that," Venomix muttered. "It wasn't really that impressive," said Colin. Isabet came to a stop, turning to stare incredulously at him. "Wow," Geg remarked, "that is a strong contender for the single dumbest thing I've ever heard anyone say." "Okay, yeah, I see how it might be," Colin admitted. "I just meant there wasn't any grand struggle, or whatever you were envisioning. It was just a really weird alignment of incredibly rare and specific conditions, and in large part Atraximos' own fault." "I remember your description," Isabet acknowledged, falling back into step with them. "You of all people heading for apotheosis would be enough of a surprising development. You're not even a midge. I'm getting the impression you don't even realize the magnitude of what you achieved, Colin. Of the very few who find a path to apotheosis, most don't even survive the initial ascension." "I had help," he said, smiling. "That's why I'm here, after all." "Even so, no one knows how to use divinity before they have access to it. Even training in magic doesn't really help prepare you for that. The fact that you immediately were able to turn around and do something so incredible, and apparently by instinct?" She shook her head. "I'm not trying to give you a big head, Colin, it's just borderline frustrating to hear you downplaying this." "Yep, that's our Colin. Vaderil," she said cheerfully. "A real down-to-earth guy. Humble, self-effacing, to the point it is actually annoying." "You're overstating it," Colin told her pleasantly. "Nobody manages a dragon family without manhandling dragons as necessary. Or do you need a reminder? I don't have a pool to dunk you in, but we can make do with sand." She hissed at him and hopped backward, then stuck out her tongue when he grinned. "Incredible," Isabet muttered. "Gotta admit, I'm hoping I get to see that before we part ways," said Gigi. "No malice meant toward you kids, but come on. That would be a sight, all right." "Kids." Venomix huffed. "Anyway," Gigi continued, now tilting her head to eye Colin in a manner that made him suddenly sympathetic to all the cuts of beef he'd given her, "that's a cool sword. Coppish, right?" Is it enchanted? You can tell that? He asked. I'm decent at spotting enchantments, for a layperson who can't actually do any magic. But, nah, mostly context clues. You say you were a scribe back in the Empire, so you wouldn't be working around with a sword, especially one that over-designed. It is a bit fancy, he agreed, drawing the weapon to inspect it. The blade itself had a decorative engraving, and the hilt was all ivory and wrought silver. Right, so that would be something you got out of the old dragon's hoard. Right? I dunno what kinds of stuff he liked to collect, exactly, but you don't seem like the kind of guy who's dumb enough to tote around a weapon he doesn't know how to use, unless it's got some enchantment that makes it useful. Thank you for giving me that modicum of credit, Colin said solemnly, returning the weapon to his belt. Yes, it does have a basic. Well, actually, I'm not qualified to judge how basic anything is, but it is a skill enchantment. So the wielder can actually fight with it, even if they don't know how. Ah. Geg grinned. Nice, I like it. Practical. That makes way more sense than fire enchantments. I swear, every prince and princess I ever met who got their first enchanted sword wanted fire magic on it, like it wouldn't be obvious what was gonna happen next. If you're not a cook or blacksmith, whatever skill you've got with the tools of your trade suddenly becomes a lot less relevant when they're on fire. I have seen so many juvenile hotheads spend their birthdays giving themselves cool scars and almost burning down their homes. You meet a lot of young royalty in your line of work? Colin asked. The way I do it, yeah. I've cooked for the royal households of half the kings in the Nurdles. Really? That sounds like a surprisingly long career for someone who doesn't even seem middle-aged. Yeah, well, you ever been there? Only to the very edges. I visited the Moonless Tower. No kidding? Gigi turned as she walked to give him an appraising stare. Visited it, Vadaril, she added, climbed it, looted it, and came out unscathed and richer. Isabet and Naren were both staring at him now, visibly impressed. He was following the orders of the single shadiest entity any of us have ever seen, Vanamux rumbled. For someone who grew up in the library and seems generally intelligent, Colin has done some impressively stupid things. Which is fortunate, these days, Colin added. That trait gives Vanamax and me something to bond over. Vanamax gave him a sour look but forbear comment this time. Damn, we'll have to swap stories, said Gigi with an approving nod. Perfect, that's our campfire chat for this trip settled. But yeah, anyway, the Nurdles are basically like the Avervals, on a smaller scale. What they call kings are pretty much chieftains. They control, like, one mountain each. The borders slosh around like stirred soup, it's all conquests and schemes and whatnot. They've stayed independent so far because they unite when attacked. That's how they pushed back the Zauzi. The nearest Vale states aren't organized enough to launch an effective invasion, not that they haven't tried, and Rivak? Well, I don't know. I guess Izyroa just didn't feel like it. There's a bit more nuance to Riva foreign policy, but that actually sums it up well enough. So, wait, if you've been living in the Nurdles, did you see the war? I don't suppose you ever encountered the Lord of Chains? She curled her lip, displaying sharp little teeth. That guy. Yeah, I've met him. Never worked for him. All the other warlords in the Dells were excited to have me as their personal chef, but that character's way too focused on Zows to appreciate the finer things in life. Like feeding your family properly, much less having a prestigious cook for your feasting hall. The way Gigi tells it, Naren said in an exceedingly even tone, she was quite the celebrity in the Nurdles. I'll be the first to admit a curiosity would be a better way to describe it, said Gigi. Those guys compete over everything. An exotic cook was a feather in the old hat. But also, I did get along very well with the Dell folk. War and hunting are huge there. I'm an adventuring chef, I kill stuff and cook it. Yeah, the Dell Kings competed to have me in their kitchens. It was a pretty sweet deal, I won't lie. respect an adventure, the chance to go new places, meet people, learn recipes, fight monsters and serve 'em up on the table. That life agreed with me. Until? Colin prompted. She snarled again. Like I said, the Lord of Chains. Look, I can respect a guy who rallies his people and fights off an invasion. Seriously, fuck the Zaozi, those slaving bastards deserved everything he gave them. But they didn't call him that because he was against chains. Guy started press-ganging beaten Zaozi soldiers and even nobles into rebuilding Del castles they destroyed and tearing down their own settlements. Just 'cause somebody deserves something doesn't make it okay to do it to him, you get me? Not to mention any idiot could see he was making it worse. Zhao's probably would have abandoned a failed colony, but if some backwater warlord inflicts an insult like that they pretty much have to launch an even bigger invasion. Yeah, I decided it was a good time to visit home, see how everybody's getting along, show 'em what real cooking is like. For which we are eternally grateful, Naren said serenely. Damn right you are, Zhiji informed him. I know the way you were eating. You're gonna miss me when I move on. Not want to stay put for long, huh? Colin asked. Zhiji shrugged. I wouldn't mind settling in, but it'd have to be a job that kept me on my toes. I get the itch if I'm stuck doing the same thing for too long. Moving on is one way to scratch it, and hey, maybe someday I'll find a place where I feel comfortable planting roots. A place where there's plenty of scary stuff for you to fight and then cook? Vedaralshi asked. What's wrong with home, then? I know the Harry mostly occupy the safer areas, but there's some wild stuff in this desert and the mountains nearby. Don't I know it? Zhiji agreed with a grin. Maybe. We'll see. But anyway, enough about me. Is that a bag of holding you've got, Colin? It is, he said, both amused and bemused by the sudden turn. Why, you need me to carry something? What kind of bag is it? What can it do? How much capacity do you have? Zhiji, Naren warned. I don't know how to answer those questions in concrete terms, said Colin, but it was the best one in Atraximos's collection. I'm pretty sure I can carry anything I might reasonably need to. Perfect. Zhiji grinned and rubbed her hands together. Hey, Naren, let's shift our route a bit north. Zhiji, he repeated in a firmer tone. What? Why, Tual Ravine is a shorter and safer route. It's shady and there's water. Why, Tual Ravine is anything but safer, and we both know that's exactly what you're driving at, he retorted. This is a pilgrimage. Not an opportunity for you to hair off and amuse yourself. We have honored guests to escort. What am I missing? Isabeth asked hesitantly. Well, reading between the lines, said Vedaralshi with a grin, there's a dangerous monster in White Tual Ravine that Zhiji wants to fight. Am I close? You are, Naren sighed. It has been inaccessible for several seasons, now. We here are not generally inclined to seek out and confront threats. There's a reason, you see, why Zhiji feels generally more comfortable living among outsiders. What's most important here and now is that a pilgrimage to Great Tiamat is an event of the gravest importance, and not an excuse to play around. Listen, Naren, Zhiji said seriously. If I was playing around, I'd be going there all by my furry little self, because that is the only way I could possibly have any fun. Coming at that thing with an ice midge, a godling, and 2 damn dragons is an absolutely ludicrous degree of overkill. But you're right, this is a pilgrimage. It's a sacred rite of the hairy people, a people who famously value practicality. Yes, and if you talk long enough, you can justify anything, he retorted. Buddy, I am perilously close to taking offense, she warned. The best possible outcome of a pilgrimage is for the pilgrims and their guides to improve the trail, is it not? To make of our footsteps a path to safety for any who follow us? Yes, you're right, Naren said patiently. But the degree of danger you're suggesting is relative to who's facing it. Like I said, ice midge, godling, and She turned and gestured emphatically with both hands at Vanimax. I suppose. You are not without a point, Naren agreed reluctantly. To do such a service to all the people of the desert would be the best possible introduction to Tiamat for our pilgrims. I suppose I'm simply reluctant to exploit them? Didn't you tell me that the core of her faith is blending the sacred with the practical? Elizabeth asked. Honestly, Naren, this does sound like a good idea. I'm no adventurer, but I am capable of defending myself. And, you know, dragons. Oh, now I get it, said Colin. You were asking about my bag of holding for its ability to carry monster meat. Exactly. Gigi said brightly. Clear a great hazard from the path and bring back food for the craft. Best way you could possibly get into Tiamat's good graces. So we're monster slayers now? Vanimax sighed. Oh, I swear you'd complain about anything, Vadaryl, she chided. Sounds like a lark to me. Let's do it, Pants. Elizabeth nodded, her expression serious. Colin looked at her, at the dragons, one grinning, her brother looking ostentatiously disgruntled, then at the two Harry, who reflected a similar dynamic. What kind of monster? Tope continued,